This is Somashekar. I am a journalist. On behalf of the Guruswamy Center, I take great pleasure in inviting all of you to this event this evening. Today's topic, as you must have read, is India's place in the emerging world order, reform of the United Nations Security Council and Multilateral Forum. Now, we are fortunate today to have three distinguished speakers who will, I am sure, give you a 360-degree view of this entire topic, which looks quite wide, but the experience of all of them, I am sure, will make it cogent, and at the end of the day, we'll be wiser in understanding the nuances of what goes on in the UN and all these multilateral bodies. My job this evening is rather easy because they are so well known. I don't need to really do a long introduction. But first I request Syed Akbaruddin to please come on to the dais. I request Bala Venkatesh Verma, please. And Mohan Guruswamy. Please, let me introduce the three speakers today. Syed Akbaruddin is former India's permanent ambassador to the United Nations. He is from Nizam College, and great privilege for me to say that he was my immediate senior in Nizam College. Now, after Nizam College, he went to the University of Hyderabad, did a post-graduation in political science. Then he went to Australia, did his master's there, came back, got into the IFS in 85-86. Now, he was posted in Egypt. I think first posting was in Cairo, and he is an expert on West Asia. So after Egypt, he went to Jeddah, and he used to tell me during that invasion of Kuwait by Iraq, he heard some of the Scud missiles. So those are some stories which I remember. After the posting in Jeddah, he came back to Delhi. That's where I met him again. Then he grew in the external affairs. We have been constantly in touch. One of the great things about us is our friendship goes back to 1978. So it's quite a long, long journey. Post 1993, I met again as a MEA spokesperson. That is where I think all of you really got to know the real Syed Akbaruddin on television and as communicator and India's spokesperson. Now, in between, he also served the IAEA in Vienna, where he did a lot of diplomacy on India's nuclear energy. Thereafter, he came to Delhi, and then he was appointed in the United Nations as India's representative ambassador to the United Nations. In that position, I think he has endeared himself to most Indian audiences when he spoke at the United Nations, and his gesture to the Pakistani journalists made him very, very popular to many of the audience here also. Now, after his successful tenure in the United Nations, he came back to Hyderabad at the peak of COVID, I think sometime in April 2020. And he did not lose time. He spent that entire one and a half year and came out with a blockbuster book on India versus United Kingdom, the story of an unprecedented diplomatic win. the behind-the-scenes story of Kulbhushan Kharbanda, no, Kulbhushan Jadhav. No. So I am reminded of Kulbhushan Kharbanda. Now, that book, made him very, very popular in the authors and books section as well. Post 2021, I think he joined the Geetham University as the founding dean of Kautilya Institute of Public Policy. I think that's where he is presently engaged in shaping public policy, and he has been quite active, delivering lectures, participating in programs, and is quite visible on television, giving his version of international events, international developments, and all that. Now, one of the other very important things for which he became known was, the diplomacy and behind-the-scenes activity which I described during his tenure ensured that this JEM chief, Masood Azhar, was declared as a global terrorist during his tenure. So that was one of the big victories of India during that time, in addition to Kulbhushan Jadhav story. He is among one of the most popular figures from Hyderabad in external affairs. And as I said, our association goes a long way. We have been right from college, where he was participating in politics, sports, debating, quizzing, and also, a popular figure during that period. To 2024, this is the first time I'm meeting him, in fact, after return from the United Nations posting. Thank you very much and welcome today. Now, our second speaker is Bala Venkatesh Verma. Now, he is again a very distinguished diplomat from Hyderabad. There is a little bit of a parallel story between Akbar and Bala. Now, Bala also studied in HPS and Nizam College, like Akbar did. Bala Venkatesh Verma went to JNU, whereas Akbar went to University of Hyderabad. Now, in JNU, he did international relations. He joined the IFS in 1988. Very interestingly, I am meeting Bala, who's my junior actually in college, after nearly 3.5 decades. The only time I came close to meeting him was in Delhi, when my colleague Ashwini Fadnis was covering MEA, and his mother, Urmila Fadnis, happened to be his teacher in JNU. So we were supposed to meet one evening, which did not happen. So Ashwini, I recollected that meeting where I missed him. But Bala Venkatesh Verma did many important tenures during his career. During 2004 to 7, he was part of the PMO, where the important negotiations for the Indo-US agreement were done. He was one of the key players behind a lot of negotiations. And as I said, the commonality after the school, college, and subject, Akbar was also very keen and involved in nuclear issues. Bala was also very closely involved in India's nuclear, negotiations. Finally, it got completed with India-US agreement signing. Interestingly, I also happen to be a journalist who covered the nuclear sector very extensively, visiting all the nuclear establishments in the country. But somehow I could never met both these gentlemen to get inputs for my stories. After this important position in the PMO, Bala Venkatesh Verma was appointed as the ambassador of Spain, Indian ambassador to Spain in 2017 to 19. After that, he was appointed as India's ambassador to Russia. During I think the COVID period, he played an important role in getting together some of the companies which were trying to get the vaccine into India, helping Indian people in Soviet Union and so on. He retired in 2021, isn't it? 2021, just before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I think Feb 2022. Now, he has vast experience in India's security and defense policies. He served as the Joint Secretary of Disarmament and International Studies in the MEA. He is also with the Vivekananda International Foundation as a distinguished fellow. And he also speaks, but he is a low-profile person as far as I know. But his deep knowledge on India's, security, India's nuclear issues and foreign policy, plus the United Nations will definitely enrich today's discussion, I am sure. And our Mohan Guruswamy is an expert in public policy, a columnist. He writes extensively on many subjects. In fact, all those who were present in the last event which we did on India-China, he is one of the leading experts on China from India, and it was some of the feedback I got, although it was a long session, it was a master class on China. So he has been driving some of the activities here, and he doesn't mince words. He is frank, he is in-depth understanding of issues, both public, the local, hyper-local, international, economic, science. I see him writing on virtually all subjects. He is a walking encyclopedia, although he is a modest person. I am sure that he will moderate this program and give the entire discussion a direction and introduction to this evening. My job as a presenter also involves talking about the Guruswamy Center, which is 6 years old. COVID, in a way, put brakes on most institutions, and the center was no exception. But in the last 1-2 years, there have been a lot of events. We did Deccan Dialogues, there were events on budgets, on important subjects. But during 2024, I think with this 8th or 9th event, the direction is that, we should have issues of public importance, academic, more serious, to, variety, diversity, and also have speakers who have different views, differing views. We would bring them on one platform and have a discussion without shouting and yelling, although sometimes it might be quite good for the audience to also participate in a agitated discussion. So we had events related to politics during the elections, and we had the representatives of all the parties sitting here and discussing for more than 2 hours. Then we had 2 events which were totally Hyderabadi. The integration 1948, September 17th, was it integration or liberation? So that again attracted a lot of audience. Then we had a book release on title Beyond Biryani. And incidentally, the author was my classmate from Nizam College. Now that book, excited a lot of discussion. Some people came for biryani, others thought, it is more a culinary book. But, we are privileged, and I would pat our center to say that we launched the book here. And today it is doing quite well across the country. That I think the author deserves a good clap. Anyway. Then we had, some current issue like a discussion on why nations fail. Some of the people said, this is too esoteric, too tough a subject, will people come? But, we were very delighted that we had a very good audience on that day. Similarly, we had a, in-depth discussion on India-China, where we had a Major General retired and Mohan Guruswamy presenting very deep insight into the subject, both from the academic perspective, and in fact the Major General took some of the audience and people like me virtually to the borders and showed what real life is, how things happen there, which we are imagining, or we are fed with too much of WhatsApp. So that day it was very, very interesting to listen to a very good exposition of what happens there. Finally, this event I think would be one of the peaks in our year calendar in a way. A lot of things happen instantaneously, some spontaneous decisions. So we are happy to have a series of events, and next year we'll, I am sure, do more. And before I close, I just wanted to tell you that when I put up this flyer on my social media handle, one guy sitting in Adelaide watching the cricket match said, is this a Nizamian view of the UN and multilateral institutions? Then it struck me that all four of us are Nizamians, which I think is a strange coincidence, and I don't think this kind of a thing would have happened beyond old boys school meeting or something on a public platform. Then it also reminded me that long time ago, Akbar had sent or given me a book on Donald Bradman when he visited Adelaide. Bradman is from Adelaide, and a hotshot camera. I still have that with me. So today I'm doubly privileged to be in the company of a senior, a junior, and a super senior, and I think I see quite a few of my friends in the audience. I wish we have a very good evening. I request Mohan Guruswamy to set the tone, and the event flow would be Mohan will introduce the subject and present his view. Then we'll have Syed Akbaruddin presenting. I think he has a slide presentation. Then we'll have Bala Venkatesh Verma. After that we'll have a Q&A. Thank you very much. Let's enjoy the evening.
Good evening, everybody. Shoma's taken us back to Nizam College. I spent 3 years in that college, sitting in one place, which was close access to the canteen. And but we've had connections with both my fellow panelists here. Akbar's father was my teacher, and at Usmania University, when I studied, I did a year of journalism. And Venkat was my minder when I went to Moscow for the first time in 1989. The government made sure that a diplomat accompanied me everywhere, lest I do things and say things which I shouldn't be doing. Anyway, so then I always wondered what happened to that nice thin young man who was keeping a hawk eye on me and who would drive me all over that cold. It was cold in Moscow, winter. And then I realized that he had risen high in the service, become the ambassador to Russia, which is a great post. The Indian embassy in Russia is a very historic building. It's a place where Napoleon actually stayed for a few days, Ulica Obucha, and the old building is still there. And the ambassador and I, his boss at that time, we had many arguments there on the state of affairs in Russia. My prediction was that Russia was about to fall down and the Soviet system was collapsing. The ambassador felt that it was going to go on forever, and we gave contradictory reports to the government. And so government said, Guruswamy says something else. And so the ambassador ticked me off. He said, you guys who come for a few days, come to judgments. So I was sent back again to Russia a month later, which is worse punishment because height of winter. And so I had to trudge from place to place. I had to say, today I'm going to go and buy meat to check the supermarkets. And today I'd go to buy carrots. So I'd go out to look for carrots, couldn't find them. So I basically told the government, a country which can't feed its people, a government which can't feed its people, will collapse. Anyway, I went to Vladivostok that year, and the embassy provided us with victuals, a case of Scotch whiskey, lots of food, fresh vegetables, soup cans, coffee. So when we arrived in Vladivostok, the city was being opened for the first time. And the Americans arrived like good Americans. They came in their own plane. And they arrived all in the same hotel. And there was no food. So the supplies provided by the Indian embassy kept us going, because we fed the Americans for a change. I said, this is to write off all the PL 480. Debt is written off here. So you guys can have coffee and tea. Of course, Akbar, my daughter speaks very highly of him because she knew him in New York, and Akbar invited her to speak at the UN. And she said, of all the things in my life, speaking at the UN was the high point. And thanks to Akbar, that happened. His father was well-known, very popular professor at Usman University, though I must say I used to give him a bad time. But he was a wonderful man, always humorous, and took us all in stride. But 55 years ago, when I went to study political science at Harvard, my professor then had a prescribed reading of a book by a man called Sam Huntington. Samuel Huntington was a foremost political scientist in the US in those days. He had written The Clash of Civilizations. And I was reading Huntington's book. Huntington incidentally had lasting infamy as advisor to the South African government, the apartheid regime. And Huntington actually described South Africa as a democracy. And so I asked my professor, Joseph Nye, who later on became Assistant Secretary of State, I said, Professor, why did you recommend this man's book to me? She said, since you're going to study international organization, I want you to start from there, because he obviously thinks that only white people are fit for democracy. And this is the world order which began in 1945 after the war, when the 5 major countries met in San Francisco to plan for a United Nations. There were Britain, France, which was occupied by Hitler. Britain was kind of number 2 to America, Russia, and China. China was also occupied by Japan. India was there in the conference, but not as a member of its own right, but because it was a colony. So the United Nations started with these 5 people, and there was a man called Henry Luce, who was the editor and founder of Time magazine. Luce was the driver behind this idea of having a United Nations. Because Luce was born in China, the son of a missionary. He was very enthusiastic about China, very impressed with China, and he didn't like to see China as a colony of Japan. And he aspired for restoration of Chinese civilization and China's place in the world. So among things Luce wanted was that the Americans should start treating the Chinese as equals for immigration. Till then, there were only a quota of 225 entries for Chinese to come as immigrants. Chinese used to come as coolies. They built the railroad system, they built everything, but they were labor who to go back. So only 225 Chinese could settle down in America. Japanese were allowed to settle down, but so Luce wanted to correct that situation. And he was one of the drivers behind putting Republic of China in the Security Council. And Luce wrote in Time magazine that this is going to be the American century. So conception of the UN was that this will be an institution for America to civilize the world, to introduce the world to democracy, to capitalism, to market economies, to the notion of individual freedoms. And so it was to be the American century. And in fact, it did become the American century. 1945, America was the sole person standing after the war. Russia was devastated. Britain was without colonies. France was devastated. China was devastated. So America was the last man standing. And America dominated the world. So as a part of my education, I went to a place called Bretton Woods, which is in New Hampshire, where the IMF and the World Bank were conceived. And in Bretton Woods, the Americans dictated terms for the international economic order. John Maynard Keynes, who was the leading economic light, spirit behind the international economic order, wanted a global currency called Bancor. Everybody agreed to Bancor, except the Americans. The Americans said, no, we want dollar. So the dollar had become the central currency. Even today, after 75 years of the United Nations, the dollar is the world's reserve currency. That means out of the billions of dollars which central banks hold, almost 69% is held as dollars. So for all, when you and I trade, different countries, we trade in dollars. When I trade with China, I trade in dollars. When I trade with Russia, I trade in, not in the happy days we used to do rupee ruble, but now it's in dollars. Everybody wants dollars. And the dollar has become, dollar used to be linked with gold. And with gold, there was a certain value to the dollar. So we all hedged to the dollar because in 74, Nixon delinked the dollar from gold. Suddenly the dollar began to float around. So, which meant that the United States could print as many dollars as it wants. Every time it fell short of money, it printed a dollar. So United States today, the dollar debt of the United States is something like 63 trillion. It's 4 times its GDP. And the United States have never run short of money. There's COVID, prints dollars. And we all run for their dollars. So we will export to America. India also is a major exporter to America. We export almost $120 billion of goods and services every year. And what do? We put that money back in American banks. And then the Americans then lend it to their own people, to all the green card holders and citizens and NRIs, to buy houses, buy cars, credit. And our money gets 1% interest maximum, or mostly 0%. They say it's a privilege to keep your money, it's safe. And they lend it to their own people, who then buy goods from us. So buy Chinese goods, buy German cars, so we all run back to America. So they've created a nice international order along the primacy of the dollar, primacy in the United Nations, where if you notice the Security Council, out of the 5 members, 4 are white. China is the odd man out. And the Security Council does not have the biggest country in the world in it. India has the same rank in the placing in the United States, in the United Nations, as say Vanuatu, which has about 20,000 people. And but 1.4 billion people. And also now the 3rd largest economy in the world. The United Nations is structured in a way that if you look, yesterday I was looking at force strengths between Britain and India. India has 800 fighter planes. Britain has 120. India has 2 aircraft carriers and so many submarines. Our Navy is bigger than the British Navy. Our Air Force is many times bigger. Our military, our Southern Command is bigger than the entire British Army. But Britain is a permanent member of the Security Council, and India is not there. So, it's a imbalanced world order, with the West dominates with the Security Council, with NATO, and control of the IMF. So with this kind of thing, the new world order which we thought was going to come, once we become rich, we become well off, become developing countries, has not happened. The Americans are still hoping that it will continue as the American century. And yesterday Donald Trump said something very interesting. He said, if any of you try to trade in your own currency, I will impose a tariff on you. Trump is not nuanced. Trump in what he says. And so he said it very bluntly. But that is the thought of protecting their primacy. That means we like to continue printing as many dollars, and you guys keep using the dollars. So with this situation in mind, and we all talk about reforming the US, the international order. Reforming the Security Council is one thing, but reforming the international order is something else. And in India, I don't think we've really understood it. Our politicians don't understand it. They have latched on to one thing. But Security Council member banna hai. This is very important. So I always ask them, kya karoge Security Council? There's IMF, there's World Bank, there's IBRD, there's so many things. There's the Chemical Weapons Conference, and we of course have no clear idea on this, but Security Council ban jaye, theek jaye. Like Vajpayee ji used to say, bas bham pod denge, uske baad sab theek ho jayega. So we are now, so every foreigner who comes to India, we make him sign a resolution with us. Joint statement. We support India's entry into Security Council. So I was counting that we have 68 such joint communiques. Every guy who comes, even Obama came, he said that British Prime Ministers come. The only fellow who doesn't say it is the man who matters, Xi Jinping. He says, we'll talk about it. The UN has to be reformed completely. And Xi Jinping tells us privately, we are not opposed to you, but we are opposed to Japan. Because if you come, Japan will come. The Pakistanis and a few others who, like Argentina, is opposed to Brazil. So they have a group called the Coffee Club. Coffee Club. The Coffee Club, his job is to oppose India, Japan, and Brazil. And Germany's entry into the United. Now, what kind of United Nations you will have if you get Germany? That means whole of Western Europe is there. France, Germany, Britain. And there's Russia as a European country, we forget. There'll be, if Brazil comes, there'll be only one South American country. There's nobody from Africa. The Islamic world, it's the world's biggest religion now. There'll be nobody from there. Of course, the world's biggest Hindu country won't be there. So what kind of United Nations is it going to be? So we haven't articulated this. I was once talking to a colleague of Akbar's who was the JS in charge of United Nations. And I thought over lunch that we will be discussing these things. She had said this is all getting too complex, The system won't understand it. So you got to peg it on something like, Security Council. So we're still pegged it on that. No UN reform is going to happen, at least not in my lifetime, but that is, use by age is coming to an end. But I think young people may not be able to see that either, reform, because we're not talking about UN reform. We're talking about one membership. So now there is talk of a Security Council which will have 10 or 15 members, 5 with veto, and the rest as members of a council. So I would recommend that the people in government should read the memoirs of Ambassador Jaramillo, of Colombia or Chile, who was the ambassador there, who wrote about his days in the Security Council. As president, he would sit outside the room where the 5 permanent members were discussing to tell him what is being discussed so that he can introduce it to the agenda. Sometimes they wouldn't tell him. So he'd be presiding over a meeting or agenda on which he had no control or no say. Anyway, so that is how the world order is. The Chinese, Russians are talking about BRICS as being an alternate. BRICS, as 5 countries together, will have a higher GDP than the G7 by next year. RICS, Russia, India and China, is another grouping inside BRICS, which is 3 trilateral powers. Then there's Quad, Japan, Australia, India and America. India runs with the hound and hunts with the hare, or other way around. We join the Quad, then we join RICS. So we will go wherever there is a place, there is a seat given. So, our foreign minister, our prime minister likes traveling. So he goes from meeting to meeting. And we are not very sure about what we want to do. So I'm hoping that today, between these 2 experts here, long years of experience in diplomacy, international organizations, multilateral organizations, United Nations, Russia, particularly in the Eastern world, we'll get some light on what we should do, not what we want. What we want is very clear. We want Security Council. But what do we do? So, how should we go with seniority?
Thanks, Mohan, for deciphering some of the things, bringing in some clarity into what we want, what is happening, and also I think setting both the experts here on giving more clarity into the real situation and where we are heading. I request Akbaruddin to speak, and before that, I just wanted to tell you, during our college days, the United Nations was a very, very strong organization as we perceived, the UN. In quiz competitions, we would mug up United Nations countries and capitals. There's one guy named Satish who retired from Harvard. He knew the entire 155 countries and the capitals. And in front of Nizam College, there was a Russia center. And so we had this great, situation of a bipolar world, Russia, US, and the UN. And India as a developing country, we had very, very high high expectations of the UN. But over a period of 3-4 decades, we have seen how, as Mohan said, the United States completely dominated. And on a personal note, in 2010, I had gone to New York and I wanted to see the United Nations from outside. Now I asked somebody, and he said there is that Trump Tower. Beside that is the UN organization, UN. So the Trump Tower was more popular. But then in the last few years, our diplomacy, the growth of India as economic power, our rightful assertion in the Committee of Nations, population, on many factors, India is now a country which needs to get into its right position in the world order. So, and diplomats like Syed Akbaruddin have brought the role of India and UN into the spotlight. I am sure he will take us into a new direction that India seeks and what his views are. Over to Akbar.
So, thank you, Somsekhar, for those very gracious words, and thank you, Mohan, for this effort that you are making to get Hyderabadis interested in issues beyond Hyderabad too. That you are falling on some of us who've gone all around the world is really remarkable. So I want to thank you and the Guruswamy Center for inculcating in Indians a sense of global realities, because today we live in a global world, and it's better that we understand what is the situation outside. So I must start by saying that Mohan and I are from the same college, but we come from different perspectives towards the world. You've heard him very well. And I want to put this in a generic thing. It can happen to anybody, and it happens to most people. In international relations, there are two big issues. One, which Mohan represents, which is justice. Everybody wants justice. There is another, which most people who are working say order. So international relations is always about conflict between order and justice. So you've heard the justice view, and you will now hear the order view from me. So let me start. The reform of the UN is as old as the UN itself. 80 years. 80 years we've been talking about reform, so nothing unusual. When we were, as Mohan said, a country which was just nascent, we talked of justice. Today, look at us, we talk about order rather than justice in many areas, and we can come to those issues. So it's normal as countries progress, you talk of order or justice, and it's normal. Someday you will talk of justice, someday you will talk of order. When there is a war in Ukraine, the US talks of justice. When there is a conflict in Gaza, the US talks of order. It's the same. Many countries do this, we use these things. So I'm not very worried about the differences between Mohan and me, because we know each other. Someday we'll say something else. Nizamians are all together in this. Having said that, let me start. So, can we have the first slide, please? So look at this. Can somebody tell me what this is about? This is a simple slide. All right, if you cannot tell, just click. Right. This, just one more click. This is a slide of 2000 years of economic growth. It shows from the first century or AD to today. So basically what does it say? Yellow is India. So it basically shows that at a certain time, India had a certain economic heft. It then reduced, and slowly it is increasing. And if you see that the yellow is increasing, the red has increased a lot. The green was very small at a certain stage. When they started exploiting India as a colony, it grew, and it's going down, as Mohan just said now. So what does this say? It says, supposing I'm a planner in India, I'm looking at these 2000 years of growth, I see that I have potential now to grow. That's what it shows me. So if I have potential now to grow, should I not plan for the next 50, 100 years? Because that's what good thinkers do. They plan for the future, not for the immediate present. Immediate present, there are people who will do. Mohan is a public policy thinker. We think for 50 years, 25 years, 100 years, etc. So if I start looking at this, can you put the next slide, please? Look at what these projections are. These are not Indian projections. It says that in 1980, India had an economy which was number 10, 2000 number 10, 2022 number 5, likely number 3, number 2 in the next 50 years. So here's my question. If we are looking at this, and this is not an Indian source, some other source, Goldman Sachs, etc., who Mohan already has told you what they are all about. So if you're looking at this sort of a likely projection into the future, you must start thinking, what am I going to do in the future? Because in 1945, I was a rule taker. Whatever somebody told me, I took the rule. Because I couldn't shape the rule, I couldn't make the rule. So I must now transition from becoming a rule taker to a rule shaper or a rule maker. If that is so, I need to look around myself and see, okay, what should I do to change? This is 1980, we were 10. So we started also thinking that, okay, what should we do in the next 25, 50, 100 years? Next slide. So this is the projection that the yellow worm is likely to grow up. And if it is going up, we should also plan to think like a big power. We should also have ideas. It may materialize, it may not materialize, does not matter. But we owe it to our people that we should start thinking and planning for it. Next. One last thing. It's not only about that India matters to the world. Look at this statistic. The world matters to India. When I was a student here, or this is much later, 10% of Indian GDP was linked to the world. We didn't bother about it. We all bought everything which was made in India. Everything was. Today, 50% approximately of Indian GDP, anything you buy in India, 50% has some linkage to the world or the other. So, the world matters to India and India matters to the world. If the world matters to India, I have a duty to say, I need to shape it because it's going to impact on me. I cannot leave that, no, nothing happens outside. What is the UN? What is it doing? It's a useless organization. I cannot do that because I cannot afford. If I'm going to grow, if the world matters to me, I have to start looking at how to shape it. So when I start looking at how to shape it, next. Just at the time I'm looking at how to shape it, Mohan is saying that it is unraveling. And that's true. Factually, it's unraveling. Next. So I want to give you the big trends rather than the small things. Small things are there. This is the number of trade restrictions in the last 5 years. You can see it was about 3,000. Suddenly it's gone to more and more and more. So everybody is restricting everything. So it's pretty clear that in terms of economic trade, etc., you're going to have a tough time. Even when I'm planning, I'm thinking, what should I do with the world? For the last 30 years, we are thinking and trying to implement. Thinking and implementing is together. Next slide. So look at this. This is Russia, a G20 country. If somebody had told me that for a G20 country, 21,758 sanctions would have been imposed because of some decision, I would never have believed it. But this is what has happened in the last 2 years plus. So you can see what is happening, that you are using every weapon, every sanction, because this is an easy way sanction. You don't need to bomb a country. You don't need to go there. You can, by regulation, implement it. Next. Look at this, multilateral assistance, 0.7 should have been there. We are at 0.6. World Bank, IMF, etc. 0.6 of what the world needs. Next. The role of multilateral finance is reducing. The blue is the multilateral, the others are individual, group, etc. and all. Again you see blue is almost plateaued, the rest are growing. Next. SDGs, we all talk about development, etc. Globally it says that 17% is what we have achieved. So the remaining we are not likely to achieve by 2030. Some we are going back, limited progress, some we are worsening also. So, you can look at the world now and see what it is happening. It is basically all the things that we thought when the world is important, let's look at it, let's engage with it. It's all unraveling in a manner that we did not anticipate. Yes. So even if you look at UN, peacekeeping is also going down. There's one more, just metrics. Next. And I will not get into this. These are all symbols of that the world is coming unstuck. Next. Again, Gaza. I will not get, Venkat can talk about Ukraine and somebody else about Gaza, etc. But basically what I'm saying is that when we were planning something from 80 to 2020, we were looking at a different scenario. The scenario has changed now. Next.
Look no further than the United Nations Security Council and the Bretton Woods system. They reflect the political and economic realities of 1945, when many countries in this assembly hall were still under colonial domination. The world has changed. Our institutions have not. We cannot effectively address problems as they are if institutions do not reflect the world as it is. Instead of solving problems, they risk becoming part of the problem.
So this is the United Nations Secretary General himself acknowledging that the institutions are not working. It's not India which is criticizing or somebody else which is doing it. They themselves acknowledge that, look, it's not working, we need to change this. Next. Anybody of you use TikTok or ChatGPT? So I asked ChatGPT, tell me what is reality. And it shows exactly what Mohan said. This is what they thought the UN will be. On the right hand side, this is what all of us are thinking. So even popular culture thinks like this. Okay? Next. Obviously then there is a case for reform. So let's not accuse India, kyun kar rahe hain reform, what are you going to do, how will it help? There is a strong case for reform. From a purely nationalist point of view, we need it. If we are going to become a big country, if we need the world, if we need to engage the world, we need to also start thinking of reform. For the last 30 years or so, we are thinking of it, trying to implement it. World is not an easy place, so it will take time. Next. So the UN system, everybody talks of the UN system, it's like a gargantuan system. So we all look at peace and security. Peace and security absorbs $6 billion. Now even less, maybe $5 billion. United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees budget is $10 billion. UNICEF budget is maybe $15 million. So there are many, many other activities in the UN system that we are not all thinking about. We need to, if you are a big country, it's not that you're only interested in Security Council reform, you're interested in other aspects also. So sure, one part of the UN system is not working, we need to address it, but there are other parts which are working, and therefore we need to also engage with them and try and see what best we can try and shape it. Next. So that's why we have a approach which is called the New Orientation for Reformed Multilateralism. It looks very glamorous, so it's called NORM. It's easy to remember, etc. So what does it want? So one, Security Council reform, not expansion. Let's be very clear. India's approach is we should reform the Security Council. Yes. Second part is there are many places where there are no global institutions. We think UN is omniscient everywhere. There are many, and I will go through what they are. So India says that, okay, in the places where they are not, let's try and look for organizations, institutions, because reforming is more difficult, starting a new organization is more easy. This is the reality of life. A system may be unjust. You cannot change it. Better to start another thing, try and work on that. In 20 years, 25 years, it may yield something. And the third one is finance. As he said, there are major challenges of finance, and if my future is based on economic growth, I need to also look at the financial part. So these are the three parts you're focusing on. Knowing fully well there are many other changes to be made. Next. So what does Security Council reform mean? Like Mohan said, it's about expansion. But it's expansion not only in the permanent membership. Indian approach is that you expand. Today there are 15 members. This was what, there were 11 members in 1945. In 1960s, when the number of members became about 90, it became 15 members, 5 permanent and 10 on a non-permanent basis for a rotation thing. Our argument is today it is more than doubled from even 1960. If it is 193 today, therefore new members who have the capacity and whose role can be better helping in a world that can have better order, that's our suggestion. Next, we also talk about improvement of working methods. Now, many people don't want to know, "Arey bhai, kya hai working methods mein?" But from a diplomat's point of view, we always mention on we need to improve working methods, like you cannot use the veto for agenda setting. You can use the veto on a substantive issue, but not on a procedural issue. The problem with the Security Council is since 1945, its working methods have not been formalized. And those who feel that they must have flexibility don't agree to it. So one of the things is we need to formalize the method so that all of us know, in case there is a challenge, if there is a opposition, how to handle it, rather than we'll decide. Then problem with the Security Council is not about expansion, about working methods. It's this issue of the veto. 190 countries say we don't mind if the veto is in some manner adapted to current realities. 3 countries don't want it. USA, Russia, China. They don't want anything to even touch the veto. The other 2 countries who are permanent members, they haven't used the veto now from 89 or something, so 35 years, so they are okay. ठीक है, the dirty work is done by the US or somebody else. Why should UK or France do this? So that is the bigger challenge in the reform of the Security Council, not about India's membership, not about the coffee club. We will get the number of votes, but everybody wants a package. In the package, they will agree for numbers. So the discussion in the numbers is between 23 and 25. It's not very difficult to bridge that. Discussion on working methods is not difficult. Discussion on permanent members or without veto. The issue is the veto. Some people say even if you expand it, no veto for the new people. They may not be elected 2 years, but no veto for them. So, and everybody feels that if you review, some element of the veto should be reduced because it has been used, misused, abused, etc. And that's the big challenge. Then there are other issues that people say, oh, but India is today an important country. 25 years after that, what may happen? Because like he was saying, UK was important at a certain stage, it is not. So they say we must have a periodic review of 10 years, 20 years, 25. Again, it's not a big issue. And the final thing is what's called a cascade effect, that you become a permanent member of the Security Council, you want a role in everything else. Because you want in the World Bank, you want in the IMF, you want everywhere. And they say, no, this is not allowed, even for the present permanent members. So that ICJ victory was a big thing because for the first time, a permanent member lost to somebody who was not even in the Security Council. Because otherwise, you scratch my back, I scratch your back, it's normal. So these were the impetus and the thinking of the Indians for the last 30 years or till 2010 onwards. This is what we were thinking. This is what we should do because this is the system. Sure, it is unjust, but we need to reform it. We don't have the capacity to start a new system. Only in small ways we can do it. Next slide, please. So we said, let's start some small new institutions. International Solar Alliance, because solar energy is important. There is no organization handling energy. So Prime Minister said we should have one world, one grid, one electricity connection. This is big goal. But aspirational countries should have big goals. Otherwise we will only be stuck in small things. So I don't see any problem at all that we need to think big. So we started the International Solar Alliance. Now more than 100 countries are members because when it was started in 2014, solar was an important thing, but not such a big thing. Today, everybody, including our rooftops, we want to put solar, put it into the grid. Elon Musk wants to have a solar battery, etc. Everybody, from top to bottom, we want. Again, Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, we feel that, infrastructure everywhere there are different conditions, procedures. But with climate change, so many things are happening. Can we all have a system where the infrastructure is common so that if something is then we have a ability to be resilient. If there is a cyclone, etc., we can have cyclone resistant, etc., and it will be common things to buy. Biofuels, Big Cat, New Development Bank. So all I'm saying is that for the last 20 years or so, we were looking at, okay, let's try to expand this system. Next. And finally was money. Everybody wants money, right from China, USA, India. So we want more money in the banking system, etc. and all. So that's what our broad 3 big, if I have to summarize 3 big goals of India, those are the ones. 1, Security Council expansion, reform. 2, new systems, new organizations. And 3, multilateral financial institutions. Next. Then comes Mr. Trump.
The future does not belong to globalists. The future belongs to patriots. The future belongs to sovereign and independent nations who protect their citizens, respect their neighbors, and honor the differences that make each country special and unique.
So his basic thesis is totally different from the last 75 years. He's saying this future is only about us, not about anybody else. So he came in 2016, I think this is when he spoke in 2017 in the UN first time, I think. Or maybe 2016, 2017. So he brought about a total different worldview. Now, if one country brings a worldview, there will be immediately others thinking on other lines also next. So the Chinese, they say, okay, if the future does not belong to these organizations, I'll set up my own. So they say BRI, Global Civilization Initiative, Global Development, Global Security. These are last few years, these global three. BRI was 2014. So you can clearly see, if you say this common thing doesn't work, everybody will start saying, I'll set up my own. Okay, you don't want me, I don't want you in the system. And you will have many such things next. Now, here's the challenge for us. When the first so-called Cold War started, it was supposed to be in Europe. And they used to say Stettin to Trieste, etc. So if you see, this is Europe. Next. And now this is broadly our area. Okay. Indo-Pacific, etc. and all. Next. Now look at the challenges for us. In 1950s, the challenges for us were very different. It was far away, no connectivity, no major challenge. Arey Baba, they are fighting. How does it matter? Look at this. We have a border issue with China. We have a border issue with Pakistan. China is building its Belt and Road. There is a problem there between the ASEAN, Philippines and China. There is another problem between Japan and China. All the issues which were far from us have come here. Now, therefore, we have to start recalibrating. We cannot think, hey, it's not going to impact us. Next slide. And it will have challenges for our neighborhood also. So, even while we are thinking big, there will be challenges for our neighborhood. I am certain others can expand on it, so I will not talk much. But we will have challenges because you see the small little pond there, China, it's come into our neighborhood. Next. So I just wanted to give you quickly one thing, that in the last 10 years, while others are thinking big, etc., we've got major challenges in our neighborhood and region because of China. And I want to make it simple. Security, you all know, Mohan had a session there, he is very well, he knows a lot about it. The border, which was by and large stable till 10 years ago or 12 years ago, 14 years ago, is today unstable. So it's a threat to our security. Prosperity, before we thought Chinese market is big, let us export, we will buy from them. We thought there were opportunities. Now we are seeing nothing is moving on this side of the trade. They are exploiting the vulnerabilities on us. APIs, photovoltaic cells, EV cars, there are many, many things. Autonomy, we thought that if we can play both China, USA, Russia, multiple there, it will give us more choices. But if you have a problem with one of them, others know that, oh, these guys have a problem, they cannot go there. So it constrains our choice. And finally, we thought, okay, before we were working with China and BRICS, SCO, NDB, we set up the new development bank with the Chinese Asian Infrastructure Bank. Today, if you want, China will say, no, we have to first sort out our other issues, etc. As he said, their argument is this, that China will not stand in the way of India's permanent membership. It may stand in the way of somebody else, which basically means I'm not going to agree to the package, so I'm not going to, not for you, but for other reasons. I'm not going to give up my veto, I'm not going to do it. So if you see in all the core areas of our approach, China is the biggest challenge to India's grand strategy. So while we may think big, we may want change of institutions, the bigger challenges are here. Next. So what do you do? When you have such challenges, what do? You will balance. That's what India is doing. At a certain stage, we will do like this. Then we'll say, no, we'll do like this. It's normal. All of us do it. In our lives, we do it. Institutions do it. Because it's called hedging. You put money here, you put money there also. It's normal that you will hedge in uncertain situations. And that's what we are facing today. We have an uncertain situation. Only solution to uncertainty is we hedge, keep our equities available. Next. So what do? If you're a businessman, you diversify your portfolio. So we don't talk only about security reform. So we don't talk only about Security Council reform, but we have a whole host of other things. G20, SCO, Quad, multiple. Because we are now hedging our bets. If that doesn't work, this will work, this doesn't work, that will work, etc. But, and I want to come to that next. So, it is normal to hedge, it is normal to have new friends, and it's normal for countries like India to be present in everything. Because as our role increases, we increase our thing. But, I think it has. Huh? Kintu, parantu. But the challenge is that all these are clubs. They have no legal sanctity. Let me be very clear. G20, we did a very good summit here. We did the best G20 summit. Or BRICS. What is BRICS? It's a club. They can decide who comes in. They can remove somebody tomorrow. They can bring in somebody else tomorrow. It does not have legal sanctity in an international organization, international law. It's a club. You agree on something. There is no repercussion if you go out and don't do that. So clubs, by definition, cannot be international law. And that's my simple point. So you can do all these things. But you need legal thappa. That thappa cannot come through these small organizations. So you still have to look at it, ki bhai, I'll agree with them, but I still have to take it to some big institution where everybody is there, and then I get the thappa. Until then, done, gone. I think the major part was coming now, but that's all right. So it doesn't matter. So my bigger point is that these clubs will require, and I had just one slide which I wanted to show, that how the world is changing. It's not about states alone. It's about non-state actors also. So they're resetting it, so let's see. So we talk about Houthis. They are not a state. Or we talk about Hamas. It's not a state. Or Hezbollah. It's not a state. But, and that's what I wanted to show, this is not only a phenomenon of the Middle East that we are thinking. It's a phenomenon that is now in the US. So let me give you an example. So, the US this year has launched 130 satellites. 130 launches. Of the 130, and it's the highest. The rest are all less than half. China is about 60, India is about 5, European Union is 4, 3, 2, etc. That's what it is, that's how. Out of the 130, 125 are of one company. Elon Musk's SpaceX. So watch out. While we are looking in the world here, SpaceX, you will have the sovereign republic of Elon Musk in space soon. Because he's going to dominate. The number of satellites they are putting up is between 8,000 is starting. By the next year they will have 8,000. He's planning 30,000. 8,000 is not the total satellites that everybody else has. Once you take over, then everything will be determined by where Elon Musk's satellites are there. So my general point is that we need to look at new and emerging actors. We need to look at, and I come back, while we talk of the big thing, and it is important for us to look at the big thing, circumstances have changed. It makes us look at small clubs. It makes us look at issues that we didn't look at. But the shortcoming is whatever you do, you have to come back. If you want your role as a big power, you have to come back to international law. And that international law can only be all-inclusive. It's like, there is a saying, and we do it all the time, that nothing about me without me. Like, you will say, no government without my right to vote. Similarly, in international relations, that is the thinking. So what about our global south? If we say, I want to be in G20, I want to be in Quad, I want to be in I2U2, I want to be in whatever else. What about the people who you are saying you are fighting for the global south? There are 110 countries whose population is less than 10 million. Smaller than maybe Hyderabad's population. But they are independent countries. So, how are you going to involve them? You can't involve them through these clubs, no? Because the club is only exclusive. Sikandrabad club is for Mohan or for Venkatesh. Not for all of us, you and me. We are not allowed there. So where will we go? Where will the small little, he was saying about Vanuatu, where will Vanuatu go? There's no harm in Vanuatu also wanting to have a say. So Vanuatu goes to the ICJ, etc. By the way, there's an interesting court case going on in the ICJ. Vanuatu says, what are the rights of all the states towards climate change? Because they say, I'm 20,000, like he says, but I'm going to be drowned because I don't emit any carbon emissions, but I'm going to be drowned because all these guys are doing it. So they are saying, please tell me what are these guys' rights, what are these requirements, etc. and all. One. And there are a whole host of, what I would say, trans-boundary issues. Yeah, next, can we move on, Father? Yeah, I told you, so we are doing, this is what I want to do. So the new concept is no multilateralism, minilateralism or plurilateralism. I have Sikandrabad club and there may be some East Maratpalli club. I don't know, maybe. But this is after 40 years I'm coming back to East Maratpalli, so I don't know. Pardon? Deccan club. So somebody wants Deccan club, somebody wants this thing. You can have any club. Ranga will have his own chartered accountants club. So, and we are thinking this is new. Just click. Can you tell me this photo? Yalta. So there were clubs then also. But where did Yalta lead to? United Nations. Exactly. So these small clubs, my same point, small clubs have their own thing, but they don't represent you. Finally, you will have to go to a bigger organization. And that's why we say we are not going to give up that aspiration. Even though people will say, why are we wasting time and all? No, we will not give it up because we know in 10 years, 20 years, Trump is going to go after 4 years. Somebody else will be after 10 years. And the United Nations has suffered these things many, many times before. In 1957, I was just looking up, only one resolution was passed by the Security Council. Yet, it survived. This is 1957. After that, we want to be members all the time. Not only permanent, we are again contesting 27 or 28 for non-permanent. So, there is an allure to that, irrespective of whether they didn't work in the past, who brought them, like Mohan's thing, who brought them? All right, whoever brought them, I have to live with them. I have to work in that environment. I cannot create my own thing, no? Even if I create my own club, it's only a club again. Next. So, these are the new things which I call challenges of, click, one more. Challenges of modernity. This cannot be solved by small clubs. Because it affects everybody. Climate change, you think every Vanuatu is going to listen if G20 agrees? No. You think migration, people are going to stop because India and USA agree? Some people will go from Guatemala, some people come from Bangladesh to India, some people will go from Sri Lanka to India, some people will go from India to Maldives. It's normal. You cannot do this individually. So, health. I mean, we saw in the pandemic, it was a total failure for all forms of cooperation, but the next one is going to come. Are we prepared for it? Yes, next. And I told you about this space race. So look at this, 134 as of day before yesterday, I think. Click. 124 are SpaceX. The rest are all rest. Click. And this is what your space is going to be. And if space is going to be like this and you'll say, no, we will just 5 of us decide, it's not going to happen. Nobody is going to agree to this. You will have to look beyond tomorrow. So if you look at tomorrow, sure, no Security Council reform. You look after 5 years from tomorrow, something has to take place, whether you call it Security Council or something. And that's my last point. Just click. I told you, what about the global south? We are supposed, so one concept of international organizations is they're all Lilliputians catching Gulliver and holding them to rules, because otherwise there's no rules. So what about the Lilliputians 110 I told you? Next. So here are the 3 options for a future world. One, click. This is Mohan and my time, bygone era. Click. This may be the new normal already there, or we are going towards there. And if we follow the Trump doctrine, click. So you do the choice. What do you want? Our goal is, okay, Baba, we are somewhere between here and there, or maybe we are after that moving towards the other end. So what's the sagacity and wisdom demands? We try to pull back rather than keep on saying, this is not good. Yes, it is not good, but that's a better alternative than what is there without. Because all international organizations are tools. And there are tools which are there only for the last 200 years. It's not in Kautilya's Arthashastra or in, what is this, Thucydides' Peloponnesian, history of the Peloponnesian, 2000 years ago. No. It just started in 850. They will make mistakes. They will be incompetent sometimes. We need space to be given because the goals are laudatory. So I will leave it at that thought finally. Yes, next. So global bodies may not thrive, but we need them to survive. So I'll rest my case on that. That's the reason why we push for them. That's the reason why we know that they are not fully satisfactory. Yet we aspire for that. So thank you very much for being patient and listening to me.
Thanks, Akbar. I'm sure he's made a compelling case for changes where India fits in, changes where a lot of small countries have a role, and also I think the way forward, some of the challenges, some of the difficulties, and one of the example which he told about the domination of, say, companies, corporates in space. For example, I write on space. This year, the number of launches that SpaceX has done is more than what ISRO has done in its 75 years, 60 years. So that is a scale at which we are looking at things progressing. And finally, the options that he presented with leaders like Trump coming to the forefront, I think we need to have some change, call it reform, call it whatever. I think we need to look ahead, and India definitely has a big role and we should play it. Thank you very much for an interesting insight. I request Bala Venkatesh to present.
Mohan Guruswamy Garu, Somashekhar Garu, thank you very much. When I was told that I could prepare a PowerPoint presentation for this evening, I thought to myself, since Akbar is speaking before me, all the relevant stuff will already be said. So there's no need for me to, and opening remarks, Mohan Guruswamy ji has already spoken. I completely agree with that. On this UN thing, whether it is a destination, an aspiration, an entitlement, I think both Mohanji and Akbar have spoken. I will not dwell directly onto that. But let us talk about India. What is it about India that gets into this debate? And I want to try to say that the world around, there is a tension between justice and order, which Akbar has referred to. We are very apt. But how that tension is resolved is solely on the basis of power. We in India somehow tend to believe that we are exempt from this formula. That somehow we are special. Power operates everywhere else, but it doesn't operate to us. That we have an entitlement, 4,000 years history, 5,000 years history. Don't you know we invented the zero? Don't you know we are the subject of the Golden Road? Haven't you read William Dalrymple? We were the original civilizers of this world. We are the largest democracy. Don't you know how many people vote in our elections? Don't you know how many students go to the United States? We are the largest student population in the United States. So these are all mental thoughts which make us escape from the central driving issue of world politics, which is power. Now, the United Nations system was created by the victors of the Second World War. It was a shared victory. The Allies won the Second World War against Germany and Japan, not solely because of the United States, not solely because of the Soviet Union, and definitely not solely by the British and the French and the Chinese. And where do the Chinese come in? The Chinese contributed a lot to defeating the Japanese on the mainland, while the Americans finally defeated them. So the Chinese also did a lot of work in fighting against the Japanese. And even the fight against Germany, it was the Soviets came from the east, the Americans, largely supported by the British and the French, came from the west, and they stopped in between. So it was a shared victory. If it was a victory that one side had fully won, which is the United States had defeated everyone, you think the United States would have established the United Nations? It would not have. I mean, if you have won everything, why do you need to share the spoils of victory? That is how power works. So the United Nations had an aspirational goal of establishing justice, preventing future war, having cooperation among states, having a charter, putting a little bit of international law, putting human rights into the thing, giving voice to even small states, sovereign equality of states was put in. All this was there. But the core of the United Nations system was the power equation that come after the Second World War. And that shared power was reflected in the Security Council. And that mechanism for protecting the shared power was the issue of the veto. So the veto was not given by God. Veto was not given by international law. Veto was a mechanism whereby the big power said, we will run this world, but let us not use this system against each other. If you try to use this system against each other, we will all have the right to stop it. That is the question of the veto. Now let us come to India. As Akbar said, and Mohanji also said, it is our absolute right, given where we are, what we are, and the contribution that we have done to internationalism generally, we have every right to make our claim to the Security Council, which we have done for the last 20, 30 years. But making a claim, and whatever argument you make, and we have many arguments, I mentioned them. Democracy, we have contributed so much to the UN system. We represent the global south or the developing world. We can do more. Then we say, it is not working. If we get in, it will start working. There are many arguments which make, and I can tell you, there is general acceptance of the fact that India is a deserving member. So let us not delude ourselves to say that we are not deserving. There is general acceptance. Even countries which don't want us to be there for power reasons don't dismiss us out of hand. Who will accept Pakistan as a permanent member? No one. Question doesn't arise. Who will accept Italy as a permanent member? Increasingly people laugh at United Kingdom being a permanent member. But nobody laughs at us. Our claim is a serious claim. But it is an evolving claim. And presently we don't meet that yardstick of the power requirement in the international system. The day you come to that power requirement in the international system, not only will there be a push from our side, there will actually be a pull from the other side. Both have to come together. Now, where are we in the international power system? And I think Akbar briefly mentioned it. I will just summarize the argument. Today we are almost a $4 trillion economy, roughly. In our 4,000-year history, 5,000-year history, India has never been so united in such a large area as presently we are. We don't have such an orderly system of democracy all over the country. We've never been, in a sense, so capable of meeting the requirements of our people, generally speaking. We've not had a famine for the last 40, 50, 60 years. Since independence, I think in 51, 52, mass starvation has not happened in our country. These are very big achievements by our standards. We should be happy for it. We should be proud of what we have achieved. But your pride is not enough to meet the power equation standard in the international system. So let us put ourselves in a comparative framework. In 1980, late 70s, early 80s, India and China roughly had the same GDP, 300 odd. Mohanji will know the actual figures, around 300 odd, plus minus about $30-40 billion. Today China is almost $20 billion. We are 4. The United States of America is around 26, 27 trillion dollars. So while we pride ourselves on the fact that we are the 5th largest economy, we'll still become the second or the third, 4th largest economy, and one day we'll become the 3rd largest economy, and we'll be the 3rd largest economy for the next 20, 30 years. All that is true. But in comparative terms, we are a distant 3rd from the first 2. Okay? Now that is the reality that we have to overcome. We have to improve our thing. And what are the areas? How do you calculate power, and what are the strengths of our country? We are a united country, fairly generally stable country. We are the largest democracy. Democracy is working in our country because it's producing growth and betterment of our people. May not be in the right pace and in the right thing. See, if you count about $4 trillion, our per capita income roughly is around $3,000. If you take out the first 10% of the population of our country, our per capita income falls to about $800, $900. $800, $900 is what 60, 70, 80% of our population lives. 60, $900, $800, $900 is the average per capita income countries in Africa. So there are still issues there. That is in terms of economy. What are the things in the economy that we are proud of? We can talk about the fantastic digital revolution that is taking place. We are all beneficiaries of that. Huge plus points in growth of our economy. Our infrastructure is growing. Our digital revolution is fantastic. Our startups are doing very well. So again, coming back to the point, compared to our own standards, we are doing very well. But in international politics, comparing it to yourself is not enough. You have to compare yourself with the outside world. How much has China produced? China has consumed in the last decade, less than a decade, more cement in construction than in all of human history. We talk about climate change. The only way climate change in the world will work, if it works, it will be a Chinese success. Solar, wind, electric vehicles, they're all coming from China. The Chinese are poised to contribute to 30% of global manufacturing. We are struggling around 3-4%. By our own standard, manufacturing is not increasing. We have an extremely talented young population, extremely talented, there's no doubt about that. And they have produced wonders in the last 30-40 years. Now, but when the best of our young people go abroad, need to go abroad, go to America, Canada, Australia, UK, whenever. I mean, there's nothing wrong in going abroad for studies. Fundamentally, is it a strength of our power, of our country, or is it not? There are two ways of looking at it. How long will we export our best talent outside? What about our own country? Do we produce? We have our own nuclear weapons, which is very good. We have our own missiles and our own satellites, which is very good. Great achievement of our science and industry. There is not a single plane in our civilian aviation sector that is produced in India. Not a single one. And there is no plan, even today, for producing a single plane that is produced in India. We don't produce our own engines. Let's talk about AI, artificial intelligence. India's contribution worldwide to the intellectual property right patents on artificial intelligence is 0.6%. India spends 0.6% of the GDP on research and development. India's defense budget is about $80 billion, roughly. Amazon's research and development budget is about $80 billion. Right? So how do we all add it up to us, to ourselves? India has never been as good as this in the past. So we should be thankful. We should celebrate the fact that we have achieved so much. We have come this far. Absolutely, there is no doubt about that. But it is wrong to think that we have arrived in the international system. We are, I said, a distant third. And the international system also does not go by your sense of entitlement. your place in the international system will not be given, it has to be taken. You have international support, it becomes easier. If you don't have international support, it becomes a little more difficult. But I'm confident, Akbar has said it, put it very rightly, it's an aspiration. Aspiration has to be backed up by capabilities. The way we are progressing, I am confident that we will achieve that stage in the future. But to judge on this one issue of whether India should be there on the Security Council business, I would say we need to keep in mind that there are other centers of growth which we should be cognizant about. We should not lose self-confidence, we should in fact increase our self-confidence. But self-confidence itself is not enough. You have to put your education system in order. You have to put your research and development system in order. You have to put your economy in order. I mean, your economic system. Finally, how do economies prosper as big powers? You have less debt. So fortunately, our debt is only 75% of our GDP, so we are doing, we are careful with our money. But increasingly, more and more elections are being fought on freebies. If this trend continues, we'll slowly start becoming we are a young country, but it will start becoming like a pension country, where the working population supports a larger and larger portion of population which is not working, which is the definition of a pension country. We can't. So if you do that, then the amount of money you can spend on infrastructure, on development of a long-term nature, what you invest in your country for a long-term nature, into your military for a long-term nature, into your technology into a long-term nature, and fundamentally into your own people. Fundamentally into our younger generation. How much do you invest in your younger generation so that when they come up on age, are they able to take on the responsibilities of citizenship in India, of a country that is more and more influential in the world, right? How can diplomacy play a role? There is this slight sense of misunderstanding of diplomacy, that if you are clever, if you talk well, if you make friends, if you show influence, the Carnegie how to make friends and influence people approach, that works to a little extent. Beyond that point, power is a question of power. So we should get away from this impression that we are exempt from the laws of power. We are not. We are like any other country in that sense. Right? So if you combine this, which is an aspiration for the future, if you combine this with a steady build-up of capabilities, and the most important, which is a long-term vision of development. I think Prime Minister has very rightly put India's development in the next 5 years, not as only for next 5 years. He talks about what will happen when we are 2047, Viksit Bharat. So you should have an immediate goal, but you should also have a long-term goal. And this immediate goal and long-term goal should be aligned. They should keep, unless there is alignment of what you want to do and what you do constantly over a period of time, that is the only way you can become a great power. A great power means a long-term investment, a consistent investment in your own capabilities. And, that is how countries have grown. The United States grew that way. The Chinese grew that way. So if we are to come into the league of the big powers, there is no substitute for us also to grow that way. Having said this, this is only a sort of a cautionary note. But having said this, I am actually confident that we will be able to do it, provided we have this combination of both a short-term perspective, but also the long-term goals. And that requires
Thank you, Bala Venkatesh, for giving a very pragmatic, insightful, India-centric perspective of the whole thing. I think he's pointed out the strengths and weaknesses, and while we pat on our back for some of the developments, in a comparative world, they might not be very big. And on a personal note, I just wanted to tell you on this, how we are in a connected and a comparative world. I had a chance to interact with Abid Hussain, one of the top Indian, IAS officers, ambassador. He narrated in one of the diplomatic meetings over cocktail and dinner in US. There was this diplomat whom he met, and another colleague came. So this diplomat said, "You have a beautiful wife." That gentleman said, "No, compared to whom?" So in a new order, perhaps if you have a handsome husband, now compared to whom? So it's a comparative world. So whatever development we have, needs to be compared to certain yardsticks. Like as a journalist, we used to have this competition with Economic Times. We wanted to become number one. So when we realized, after 10, 15 years, we came second. But the second was, first was here, second was here. So we never caught up. So there are a lot of these iniquities and, comparative things that we need to look in. And Bala Venkatesh Verma has put the whole thing in perspective, about India's aspirations and goals. Thank you very much. Now, after all the three specialists have spoken, given three different views, we'll open up for Q&A. Please raise your hands. The mic will come to you. We will ask the question to the speaker.
How is it calculated? There was no metric did not we had a great nation, we were a great nation, and the other states. It's not part of that kind of narrative.
Right. It's fair to ask what's the basis, and I think it's valid. So I always put where the source is. So we will show it to you. The sources again, academicians can do this, and they have. It's like saying on what basis is climate change going to happen. There is a science to this, and I'm certain Mohan can indicate that. And this is not being contested because it's not our data. It's a data of academics in universities.
It's by a famous economic historian called Angus Madison. He uses regression analysis to go backwards. And using that regression analysis, you get GDPs of different societies at different periods of time. And in 1620, when Aurangzeb was emperor of India, India had the world's biggest GDP. Almost 40% of world GDP was in India. In 1952, India was down to 3% of world GDP. Now we're coming somewhere to about 9. But what the chart also tells you is that today only 2 large economies are growing. China is growing at the rate of 23%. Contribution of world's growth comes from China, and about 16% of world's growth comes from India. So without India's growth and China's growth, the world economic growth will not take place. So that's why these 2 countries are now becoming very important. That's what that chart says.
Yeah. You wanted to ask, yeah. Then next we'll come to you. Yeah. Please, I think you wanted to ask, is it? Okay, since the mic is with him, let him finish quickly. Okay. Short question, please. Yeah. Then we'll come to you.
Yeah, my question is to you, sir. Regarding clubs, what you said, we had the oldest club, the SARC, and where did we lose out? I mean, today we don't have good relations with any of those members, and we are kind of isolated. What went wrong?
So actually, we were part of another club also called the Non-Aligned Club, before the SARC even came into being. So clubs, and that's why I'm glad you raised this club, because clubs, they have a dynamic of their own. They will grow, they will collapse. They don't. We need to understand that these clubs by definition are like this. There are so many clubs. There was before that Bandung Club. When I showed Yalta, I also had a photo, I didn't put it up, of Bandung. There was Nehru, Tito, Nasser, gone. So clubs will keep changing and evolving. I don't want to get into a South Asian discussion about where our challenges are. I think irrespective of, even, first of all, I wouldn't want to agree with what you said, we don't have with any. I don't think it's fair. Today, we have a Marxist president in Sri Lanka. Yet, Sri Lanka is not saying anything because we have given them $3 billion. So there are equations which are good in some places it's backfired, some places we have a perpetual problem which is on our western neighbor. We know this. I myself have served there, so I'm well aware of what those challenges are. But we shouldn't look at, can we just put that statistic? Yeah, so we shouldn't, clubs by definition will have problematic. So don't only look at clubs. So look at there it is, Angus Madison's.
Ramon.
Yeah, it can, and it's a slide, so please don't think that's an Indian slide, WhatsApp group has sent it. No. I mean, we need to appreciate that what is available data, we shouldn't manipulate the data, and I will be the last one to do that. So coming back to your thing, clubs, by definition, some clubs will die, some clubs will open, some clubs will change. Quad wasn't there 10 years ago. I'll give you an example. In 2017, and this is a live example. In 2017, then the ambassador of the US was Nikki Haley, who then became a presidential candidate. And she came to me and said, Syed, we must have a Quad meeting in the UN. 2017, not very far, 7-8 years ago. And I said, this is a new beast, I need to check. Because we were having BRICS meetings, we were having SCO meetings, and she only wanted lunch, not a formal meeting at all, just a lunch. She said, let's have a Quad lunch. So I asked our capital, they said, no, Quad is only a capital-run thing you cannot have. In 7 years, presidents are meeting in Quad. All diplomats all over the world are meeting. So this club has risen very much. Until 2017, we were not even willing to have an informal lunch. So these things, clubs change, the circumstances change, and we should look at it that way, rather than the way that, this club is by didn't function. Clubs by nature will have a challenge. Even the very big clubs, NATO is having a challenge now. After so many years, Trump is saying, why should I pay so much? Or look at what what Canada and Mexico, Canada and US have the best of relations. But look at what is happening there. So clubs will change when membership changes, somebody becomes president, something else will happen.
Yeah, that gentleman there.
So a little while ago, we were given in the news, international news, that the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, was arrested. I do not know, probably he was arrested by International Court of Justice. He was proclaimed as a criminal. The United Nations organization or any other organization, what they did to implement this arrest? First of all, was he arrested? Or it is just a news item for us?
So he's not arrested. The court has decided to prosecute him. but maybe you didn't hear the news before that it had decided against President Putin also.
Yeah.
So let's not target one. So for the first time, this ICC, and India is not a member, and I'll come to that just in a while, but it's not the International Court of Justice, it's the International Criminal Court. It does not require all UN members to become member of that. Israel's argument is, I'm not a member of that court, so I'm not subject to their jurisdiction. The counter argument of that is, yes, you're not a member, however, what you did was on the soil of one of our members, which has submitted claims against you, so it's on their soil, so you are liable. It has happened with other people also. The regime in Myanmar, President Putin is finding it difficult to go to some places in Europe because of this as a challenge, apart from his other differences with West European leaders. So the International Criminal Court is a separate court. It's not a UN entity. There is a Treaty of Rome which brought this into being. It's not in the UN Charter, unlike the ICJ. The ICJ Charter has to be agreed by every UN member, but India is also not a member. And our argument then was that this court only deals with cases where national courts cannot persecute somebody or prosecute, and therefore you go to the international court. If we have a thriving national system, we don't need to go. And therefore we also stepped out. We never joined the ICC. The bigger powers like the US and the Russians thought, oh, the prosecution has to go through the Security Council, so we will join because we will be exempt. That's how institutions evolve. That was one path of prosecution. They thought that's the only path. So the US, and initially they agreed. However, when the Democrats changed and President Bush came, he saw that there will be attacks on US soldiers in Afghanistan. So he said, oh, I'm not going to ever ratify this. Similarly, Russia till just now was a member. Now it said, oh, we are not going to ratify it, we are withdrawing from it. So my generic point is that institutions evolve, and these will have an issue, but it does not stop. As Ambassador Verma said, if power politics is the basis of the pecking order you do in, then, I mean, by the way, there was one. President of Sudan, President Bashir. So he came to India in 2015 for the India-Africa Summit. And there was a ICC warrant against him. They came to, I used to be the chief coordinator for that summit. And they came to us, we said, we are not members, so whatever you want to do, you can do. We are not going to listen to you. In fact, we flew him from here to Kadakwasala because he was a NDA alumnus. So countries can decide. These bodies, again, clubs, jurisdictions are limited to the members of the club, not to others. Therefore, my bigger thesis is that beyond clubs there has to be something. Otherwise, each club will decide for itself.
Yeah, Mr. Raji.
Thank you very much. It's a very for your insights which you have shared. It was a very fruitful evening, I should say. But two things are there. One is that economic ambition is one thing, and political setup or political mechanism is another thing. How shall we resolve this? Because we say that we'll grow at the rate of 8, 9 and 10% and all that. And with that also, I don't think we should be truthful and honest also. When we talk to people as such, yes, we should say that we need ambition, but we should also bring them to, reality. That, it's a distant goal, as you have been saying. So it may be part of diplomacy or whatever it is, but we should, I think, keep people, tell them, if not the whole truth, part of it. That's one. Number two, I was going through Kishore Mehbubani's work. So I would like to know, I think since you have been there in UN for several years, and I also know a bit because Ramesh Thakur, he worked on Detente and he was Assistant Secretary General. So we have worked with him. What I would like to know from you is that all that you do there as representative of India is all that you do, or the political mechanism. I don't think we can compare India with Singapore, but it is a question how they do it. Because when we go through this book, we find that there is a very good communication between the person who sits there and also the person at the top, that is the president, and even I think the foreign secretary and others. So is it that we talk there and we forget? Or there is a continuous, appraisal of what did we say and how we should proceed?
Yeah, I think there's two questions, I think.
So the first question is that, yes, political mechanisms play a role, but every time a diplomat say yes, look for the but. The issue is that in international relations, we generally do not attribute value to a political mechanism. Otherwise, China would not have been a member of the Security Council. It was looked at the power equation then, irrespective of what their domestic situation was. The power equation that they were the victors of the World War II. That's it. If you go by any metrics, China was nowhere in 1945. You look at the economic metrics, it would not have been there. But it was the victor. So location is as important in international relations as all the other dynamics. So let's not think that and generally it's anathema to go down the path of internal institutions in any international. Otherwise, Saudi Arabia can be told you are an anachronism. Countries will not have ties then. I mean, US and Saudi Arabia have the best of ties. Or India and UAE now have the best of ties with very different political structures. So generally it's kept aside. Your second question about mechanisms, I can assure you, and Ambassador Verma can perhaps add to this, that our systems are very strong. There is no issue. I just gave you an incident of a lunchtime. We still had to get clearances from headquarters. And I can tell you, I fought a very difficult election at the ICJ. Everything, including the Prime Minister of India, called and said, what do you need? Do you want something? What more do you want? And I can also tell you, in that election, before we announced, the Prime Minister is asking for votes for us. So I think the leadership is in good hands and the systems are very good. We may not be having the capacity because our interests have exploded. Because just that, we have, when I remember the ICJ in 2017, we had only embassies in 117 countries. Today we have in about 140 or plus, 45. Yet we have another 40 to go. So the systems are in good hands. The communication is very good. And we are fortunate that our leadership pays a lot of attention to these things. For whatever reason, you may say because they want to be in the papers or you want it's a glamorous thing, whatever else. I'm not getting into those areas because it's unfair to judge, because I've worked with two different prime ministers, and both of them were pretty clear on what they want for India. So the leadership, the communication and all is excellent. Even the diplomatic service. Also, we've been fortunate in the external affairs ministers we have. We have had a whole series of very good external affairs ministers, because they don't choose somebody just to become external affairs minister. They're either veterans like Mrs. Sushma Swaraj, who was a veteran politician, she knew the entire system, etc., or Dr. Jaishankar, who's a veteran diplomat. So I think the systems are in good order. I won't blame that for any shortcoming on our part. But Ambassador Verma can add something.
Thank you very much for your presentation, sir. My question is to Syed, sir. So I wanted to ask that the forced migration, because you spoke about the migration situation. So as we can see right now, the forced migration situation is at a top-notch level. And so what can the international NGOs, non-governmental organizations, or international leaders can do to stop people from forced migration and build a better life in their own home country? For example, the Syrian refugee crisis or the Rohingya refugee crisis. Thank you.
I think it's a very good question, and it's a futuristic question because it's only going to get worse and worse. So let's start by saying that migration, currently there is no global arrangement, and that's why I put that there. Like for artificial intelligence, there is no global arrangement. For migration also there is no. There is one thing called the Global Compact. Compact by definition is not a treaty. It's not a binding agreement. So it's pretty clear. If you go back in history, migration is normal in human beings. Boundaries have been drawn artificially, but human beings have moved all around. So you can see that the first human beings came in Africa, then they came Africa. That's why it's called the mother continent, because that was where first human beings were there. So your point is right that there will be transboundary movement, and given climate, given other challenges, there will be. But we come back to the world today. The world today is not who will accept migrants. Let me give you an example. You were not born, we were all alive when the refugees came from Bangladesh to India. You know, we were a country of 500 million population, and about 10 million refugees came here. And those of who you will remember, there used to be that time there was no internet, etc. So all of us used to have 5%, 5 paisa refugee relief stamp. If you go and fill petrol in your car, you have to pay refugee relief cess. If you go and see a film, we had to pay refugee relief. Look at Europe. Just now you said Syrian refugees. Europe is 500 million today, total of Europe. Total number of Syrian migrants are about 3 million refugees, whatever you call them by. Okay? Europe is not willing to take 3 million people. They are paying Turkey. We'll give you money, keep them there. Don't allow them to come. So, we are in a world today where that world which we did was very different. And our economy was really bad at that time, 1970s. Look at GDP, we have been at the bottom of the GDP cycle at that stage. Yet, we allowed that to happen. So, today, it's not going to happen. We're going to face difficult because there is a refugee convention. And they do not want climate to be part of that refugee convention. But here's what Deng Xiaoping said. And that's where Mr. Mohan Guruswamy's words are true, that Deng Xiaoping said, if China doesn't grow economically, all of you will suffer because thousands of Chinese will get out and go. Exactly the same for India. If we do not grow, people are bound to move. I mean, they are not going to be restrained if you do not. So it is in the world's interest that large countries grow. And when he said China at 23% of the contributing to the global GDP, India at 16%, that's the normal way it should happen. Otherwise, the rest of the world will have a problem. So coming back to what NGOs and all can do, it's a small part of the bigger problem of no treaties, no oversight, no UN organization dealing with it. That's what will happen. If you don't have any organizations, Trump will say one day I'll allow, next day I will not allow. If you do something, I will do it, we'll not do it. And many other countries also. But generally what happens is refugees go only to the neighborhood. Going to further areas is very small. So when Afghan refugees came, they went to Iran, they went to Pakistan, some came to India. Nobody went from there large numbers to Europe, etc. So we need to understand refugee problem is much more complex for countries with these challenges. So the bigger challenge is, let's try and address the root causes. rather than ameliorate. NGOs can only ameliorate, and it's a good thing. Humanitarian assistance, etc. It's a good thing. They should do it, but it's a balm. It's not the main medicine to solve that problem.
Yeah, last two questions we will have. One from this gentleman and one here. One to the left and one to the right.
Hi, good evening, gentlemen. I'm coming back to the start in the sense that I would want to know why India did not take its position in the UN Security Council. It had a chance. You mentioned it briefly, but the kind of insight, deep insight that you give, I would like to really, as a proud Indian, I would like to really understand why in the hell we were so strong, so big, and yet we did not get there. So maybe you'll give me an answer to that.
I didn't understand what you were saying, why we didn't get there.
Why we did not get into the Security Council.
Till now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Even then, at that time, we had a
40.
I think in 1945 to 47, we could still use our cloud with the UK also.
Right.
And get a permanent seat.
Okay, so no, I think you are mistaken, and I think behind your idea is a thinking that we were offered a seat and we didn't take it. Yeah. So I have also heard these. So I remember when I was the ambassador there, I asked, I need to search everything. Is there anything on record in the UN mission? It could be elsewhere, perhaps. But I asked, we need to search. I was posted there twice for four years. First year was my inquisitiveness. I was the first secretary. And next time I said, I'm ambassador, I need to find this because this is going around. And I found that there were no data at that end. Now, but that doesn't mean to say it never came. It could have been somewhere. So my understanding is that there was some communication between Vijay Lakshmi Pandit and Prime Minister Nehru, etc., that the Americans are offering it for us. Or there is some other communication that the Russians raised this. Now, let me tell you what it requires to change the UN Charter. And then you can think, was this really serious or not? So, the Charter requires all the 5 UN permanent members and first of all, two-third majority of the UN General Assembly, ratification by two-third, including all the 5 permanent members. So now let's take this case. Who would they want to bump off? If somebody can explain to me, 5 members, if India has to go, it's not that India was going to become a 6th, no? There was a thing that in place of Republic of China and all. It's possible. I mean, that may have been the proposal. Now, if that is the proposal, Republic of China has to agree to it. Republic of China was the representative in the UN till 1971. So in 50s, do you think if this was going to materialize, do you think that the Republic of China will say, all right, India, take my seat, I give it up, I will ratify it? It's an unlikely scenario. I mean, it's unlikely. I mean, maybe it is, I don't know. But so therefore, it did not come to the UN because we know how many more difficulties. The gentleman just asked me a question that somebody says something, are you implementing it? So it never came to the implementing stage because we are an outpost at the implementation stage. So whatever else, there may have been communication and there is evidence to show there were these communications. But we didn't take that call because somebody may have calculated that nobody is going to give up their seat in place. Which parliament, tell me, is going to say, okay, give up my seat? We have here my good friend, Mr. Gaur. He will tell that no political party can agree to this thing in any country. It's not possible at all for any country's parliament to ratify and say, I give up my rights, you appoint. So he's not there. Kishore Mahbubani recently said, UK should give up this right and give it to India. This is cuckoo's nest. It's not going to happen that UK Parliament will say, okay, I give up my seat of the permanent thing, even I have become weaker, India has become stronger, I give it to India as a 80th anniversary thing or a 90th anniversary thing. This is not It doesn't work in reality. So my conclusion is that whatever may have been the incipient nature of that, it was not taken forward for legitimate reasons, because to get that through is very difficult. Now you come back to why we didn't get it now. That is because I told you it's not about India. So let me put it another way. When we first put our case, it was not that we wanted to be Security Council members, and we need to understand that. It was because we thought Japan and Germany will become. This was in 91, 92, just after the Cold War had ended. And so this was the new flush of, okay, let's put our friends Japan and Germany. The US wanted Japan and Germany. And after some time, Russia was also in a weaker condition. So Russia also said, okay, Japan and Germany. So we put in our thing to say, if they come, we also will be there. So the first 10 years of this thing from 1990s to say 2000 approximately was only a thing that when you get, we will also get. So please don't look at the first 10 years, because we were actually trying to block Japan and Germany until they also became part of us. So it happens in the UN like elsewhere. If you are the naughty boy, they pay more attention to you. If you are the good boy, nobody pays attention, chodo. So when we started saying no, so Japan and Germany came to us, let's all be together. And that was a time that Japan's stature was much higher. Today, it's not the same Japan it was in 2000. You can look at it, economic, etc. So first 10 years, leave it out. Now the next 10, I told you after 10 years, how the world has changed. We had 10 years perhaps. The situation was not ready. There were very serious attempts in 2004, 2005. It was because the Africans, because everything was agreed, who will be Africa's representatives? Africans said, no, we don't want to decide now. So there are many issues other than India. So my general thing all of you need to remember is that our goal is, when there is a change, we have to be part of that change. And we know that change may take long. It is not going to happen immediately, but it shouldn't be that there is a change and it's without us. So we need to be positioned in such a situation that whenever that change happens, India should not miss the boat, because we missed the boat first time.
Yeah, I think that's very, very detailed.
Let me add to this, because I think it's important to understand this. You see, I think you asked a question and Guruswamy has answered the question. But behind your question, there's a certain understanding of how the world runs, which is somebody will give it to us and we'll take it. The world doesn't run that way. The Americans offered us the Security Council seat to replace the Republic of China, because the communists had taken over in Beijing, which were not in the UN Council seat. They wanted to create a fight between us and China. The Soviets did the same thing. A couple of years later, they did the same trick. Because they were not getting along with the communists. They said, why don't you come in and take it? Okay? If we are innocent of how the world runs, we would have got into the thing and said, yes, we want to take it. We would have not got it, and we would have created a fight between India and China. When the Americans were offering that seat to us, they were also screwing us on Kashmir. Right? So you have to see the totality of the world. No? They were supplying arms to Pakistan. We went to Kashmir in the innocent presumption that the UN will solve our problem for us. They converted the invasion of Kashmir by Pakistan into an India-Pakistan dispute, and until today it is stuck in that. We signed the similar agreement and all, it's different thing. Countries will not do you a favor. So I think as India grows, we should get out of this mindset that we will get something because someone will give it to us. Nobody will give it to us. Not our best friends, of course not our worst enemies. Right? So we have to understand international politics in a way where you position yourself, you build your capabilities. Akbar Sahab said, when the opening comes, we should be the first through the door. And I think that is the way we are. we are proceeding.
Yeah, I think thanks to Akbar and Venkatesh Verma for, I think, clearly explaining what in WhatsApp is a viral story at the top of the charts about Nehru refusing, all that which we all keep reading. I think they have given a clear explanation of the realistic situation. Now, on that note, I sincerely thank all the three speakers for a great evening. We should give them a big clap. I think it was a very highly educative session for me, and I'm sure all of you will agree. You all deserve a bigger clap for coming here, spending 2.5 hours on a Saturday evening. And I realized when we last 2 days that we are competing against a lot of activity and the biggest Indian show of marriages. So there are so many marriages happening. We are apprehensive whether we'll get half the audience, but I sincerely thank each and every individual for making this a wonderful evening. And I'm sure the content that we have will be hosted on our YouTube, and it should become a part of future for people to ordinary people to listen. And let's all have a great weekend. Thank you very much again.